Hello and welcome to another episode of the Lion Ghost Show. Pleased to have you all here with us. And this show, I'm your host, by the way, Wittgensteinian. Along with me is my co-host, Froggy. We will be your host for the evening. Hello, Froggy.
Good to be here.
And so we're going to start the beginning of this show by playing a clip. For those of you who might have seen our other episode on YouTube called "Why Do You Believe?", where we wanted the second portion of that, we wanted to ask some theists rather, their answer to that question, how they came to their beliefs and what are some of the reasons for having those beliefs. And so we're going to start off playing a 30-minute clip of that conversation between Cartesian Theist and Inspiring Philosophy. And after that, we will be having on our special main guest, the infamous DarkMatter2525 from YouTube. And so, without anything else I'm forgetting, Froggy?
Basically, if you want to watch the full conversation that happened between them, we're going to post a link below the YouTube video of this show when we broadcast it. But for now, I'll just play the video.
Well, and for now, we can also post the link. I'll post the link in the chat too, to the full video, since it's up now. So,
all right, Here comes the trailer.
Negation. I'm sure you two are familiar. I heard that you guys know each other, so this should be interesting. But Cartesian, we were basically talking about why people believe, and of course, as part of the two-parter, we want you to basically discuss, your reasons for believing, and then we'll move on to Aspiring Philosophy. Can I call you IP?
That's perfectly fine. Most people do anyway.
Okay, then we'll start with you, Cartesian, then we'll move on to IP, and then I guess we'll go from there. So, Cartesian, if you wish to go first, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, cool. Well, I haven't really got a speech worked out or anything like that, but obviously to set the context, this was, I asked I think I wrote on the thread, didn't I, first of all, to one of the videos that was about, what is faith for religious people. And there'd been a lot of suggestion in one of your previous programs that faith is predominantly an emotional thing, and because it's based in emotion, some people were saying anyway, or seemed to be suggesting that invalidates it in some way. And I just wanted to make the point that actually, for certainly most of the theists that I know and that I have read, now all I can talk about this evening is my own religious tradition, which is Christianity. And certainly within that tradition, the majority of that tradition, if you exclude maybe one or two philosophers, especially Kierkegaard, most of the Christian philosophers of the last 2,000 years have always spoken very, very well of the relationship between faith and reason, and in fact that actually faith and reason overlap with each other. So I think, first of all, I wanted to make the point that faith for certainly most Christians that I know and for myself is something that means much, much more like the word trust, which is, of course, what you will find in the dictionary as well. So it's not, sort of like Mark Twain's idea that faith is believing what you know ain't so. That's a famous quote, isn't it, from Mark Twain, or someone like Richard Dawkins, who says that that faith is like believing something in the teeth of the evidence or against all the evidence. So in other words, basically you're deluding yourself in some way, and that's not what faith actually means. So if you go back through Christian philosophers like St. Augustine, Aquinas, Descartes, Locke, and many, many others, you get this idea that actually faith is something which is based on some reasonable beliefs, and obviously there's a lot of overlap between the word belief and faith. And so that was really the first point that I wanted to make, was that this idea that faith is an emotive thing and that it lacks any intellectual integrity is something that I don't recognize that at all from having read many, many Christians on this issue. And faith is something which is about trusting God, because there are good reasons to trust in God. Now, of course, that would then lead on to a discussion about what many of those reasons are, and I think there are lots of reasons why someone might think that there is a God. But I think that first point that I wanted to make was about what the nature of faith really is. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. And to come back on that.
Yeah, we can start from there if you like. If you want to continue from that point, you're more than welcome to. If not, then IP, if you want to go, you're more than welcome to.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would just probably want to build on what CT was talking about. Basically, I don't think I've ever, I mean, a lot of Christians will say they had like this experience with God or whatnot, and that's why they believe, and that it just relates to their own personal experiences. Personally, for me, it was never really along that lines. I just began studying one day and eventually picked up on the idea and started looking at the conclusions of what these many theistic philosophers were saying, and eventually became a Christian on that basis. But I remember a quote from Dr. John Lennox that's kind of stuck with me, and he's talking about faith, and basically he's answering this question here: is faith blind? Do you believe because of lack of evidence? Do you rejoice when there is no evidence? And he says, if you look up in an English dictionary, you will find that faith, belief, and trust are all related to each other. Now, we do not at the ordinary level of life put our faith in people unless there is evidence. The financial crisis recently is one of the staggering examples. We thought we could trust the bankers, and the whole financial system froze. Why? Because they couldn't gain back the trust. Why? Because they couldn't produce the evidence. And Dr. Lennox's basic point is that you will, on our basic level of life, we don't really put our faith in people unless there's evidence. So the idea that theists, specifically Christian theists, would believe in God just because or without any evidence is kind of contrary to what I have become to believe and what I've come to find, especially along with reading a lot of the philosophers through Christianity.
All right then. I do want to go back, and then after I comment, we can go on to negation. Then after that, it's practically a free-for-all. As far as now, you say that this would not be emotionally tied because it's all about building trust, and building that trust would be relying on evidence in order to support, to be the foundation of that trust. Is that what you're saying, Inspiring?
I would say yes. A lot of the, I mean, I could show good support for that. Yeah, of course, that faith comes from evidence. It doesn't just come from blind faith, or the opposite of what that would be.
All right, so you would say that yours in confusion, you can obviously answer this as well, that your trust or your belief is backed by a foundation of evidence, correct?
Are you asking me or CT?
Both. Either one of you can answer.
All right, then, yes, I would say my faith in God is definitely backed by evidence.
All right, then, Cartesian?
Yeah, and I want to add something to this here. This is a very, very thorny issue in philosophy, especially in the area of the theory of knowledge, epistemology. So the question here is, I don't want to get tied to what's called evidentialism, especially what's been called strong evidentialism. Now, strong evidentialism is the view that everything that I believe, I must have some evidence for it. Now, there are huge problems with that, and most philosophers today do not hold to strong evidentialism anymore. Because all of us, if you think about it, all of us, it doesn't take long to think about the fact that every single one of us, probably all of us in here agree that we have beliefs for which we do not have evidence. However, with that caveat in place, I would be willing to grant that I do have reasons for believing, and I would consider those reasons to be good evidences for believing. But at the same time, I don't want to get caught into having to say that everything that one believes must have evidence for believing, and especially I want to draw a distinction between evidence and proof as well.
All right.
And real quick, just to, I think for the viewers more than anybody, CT, if you could expand on that and give us an example of what you would see as a belief that is not based in evidence, I think that'd be really helpful for the audience.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think even, I mean, your first program was on solipsism, wasn't it?
Yes, it
Am
was.
I right?
Yes, solipsism, correct.
I have to admit, I didn't hear all of that. I think I heard about the first 15, 20 minutes, and I think there was, at least if I remember rightly, there was this frustration that it would be very hard to demonstrate to somebody who is a solipsist that you exist. So, for example, the belief that you and I, this evening, are not a discussion in the matrix, that is something that which we believe. Now, we can't give certainly not strong evidence. We might have a few reasons to think that, and probably one of them would be about the burden of proof. But that aside, it's not like we can demonstrate. We certainly can't demonstrate that we're not in the matrix. Yet we think it's more reasonable to start on the assumption that at least things are the way we perceive them to be, the principle of credulity, as Richard Swinburne calls it. So we believe that things are the way they seem to be, and so that we do actually exist. So we believe that, but we don't have evidence, and certainly not in the sense of having strong evidence that we're not in the matrix.
All right. If you say that it is things, or there's some things that you hold that you don't necessarily have evidence for, what then would you call the backing of your faith? If the backing of the faith was evidence, and if you subtract the evidence from that, would your faith still be supported by what?
Yeah, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying that my faith does that. I'm agreeing that I think I have good reasons, which I would then use the word evidence for, because I think evidence can be good reasons, that I do have evidence for being a theist. I just wanted to distinguish myself from what's called evidentialism, and that is the view that one must have evidence for all of one's beliefs.
Well, yeah, if you subtract the evidence, that's what I'm asking. If you subtract the evidence from your belief foundation, what then would still be supporting your belief in a god or gods, depending on if you're monotheistic or whatever?
Well, that question doesn't apply to me, but I think such a person would, traditionally, you would call them a fideist, someone who has either no reasons for believing what they believe, or they believe things contrary to reasons not to believe, would generally be labelled a fideist. But as I say, that virtually applies to no Christian philosophers. I mean, the obvious one is Soren Kierkegaard. Everyone brings up Kierkegaard when fideism is talked about, but even then scholars disagree as to exactly how fideistic he was. So really he's a marginal case within Christian philosophy. So yeah, I don't believe that applies to my own position.
All right. Well, you said that there's some things that you hold that you don't necessarily have evidence for. And so basically, what would be the supporting foundation for your belief? Because you yourself said this, that, there are some things I hold to that I don't necessarily have evidence for. For example, the solipsism. But at the same time, I don't take a position on the solipsism. It may or may not. I just happen to assume past it and just assume that U, negation, and IP are not just a figment of my imagination. And, I just assume past it. But to have a actual position, I could not really hold that position on anything other than my own wants and desires. But then that's not really a good foundation to support something that you find to be true. So if you subtract, like I said, the evidential part of it, what then is left to support your theism?
Well, this is where we're both on the same page, because basically what we need to do in order to move forward in the discussion is we need to agree that we're starting on the assumption that the world is real and that you and I do exist, and that we didn't come into existence 2 minutes ago with all of our memories put in place. We come to this whole discussion all the basis of making some assumptions for which we don't have strong evidence to the contrary of. And I think I would argue that's true of all four of us in here. So we're granting each other those things.
Maybe I could kind of clear this up, is that I don't think any of us, in fact, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be on this call if we were solipsists. Maybe you can, I think that we're getting to the point where we're kind of getting almost to the point of defining evidence versus proof. Even though we can't prove we're not in the matrix, all of us believe we're not, and I'm going to argue more toward the evidentialist side, in that the reason we don't believe that is because of the evidence that we find, the reaction of the world that we perceive around us, and that. So I guess the question that I would like to pose here is just to understand why you don't believe you're in the matrix. If it's not based on evidence, what would you call that, and what reasons could you give for not believing we're in the matrix right now?
Well, I would first of all turn your statement back on you and say, well, you would cite the world around you as evidence that you're not in the matrix, but that is based on an assumption. You're assuming that the world around you is really the world around you. So your reason for believing it.
Right. What I'm assuming is that from what my sensory inputs, if you will, all of my senses are telling me, which by all accounts could be completely flawed. I absolutely grant that.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But again, I think we're splitting hairs. I think that for me to say that I know that they're not flawed, I would have to give some proof. I'm not saying that that's proof. I'm saying that based on my perception, based on my reaction, and I'm saying involuntary action, to the world around me, it gives validity to my belief that I'm not in a matrix. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not in a matrix, but I'm saying I'm going to act as if I'm not, based on the evidence that has been provided to me from what I perceive as outside sources. And what I'm saying is that the difference between knowing I'm not in a matrix would be a proof, versus reacting as if I'm not in a matrix would be evidence. And my question to you is you don't believe you're in a matrix basically for the same reason that I don't, because we do have, using that terminology, evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, I want to try and clear this up slightly. You asked for an example of something which we have to believe, and we believe it on the basis of not having, a huge amount of evidence for it. Now, I would come back and say you can't use the evidence of the external world as evidence that the external world really exists. The reason you can't do that is because that is still based on the assumption that that world really is a real world. So you're trusting all your senses. And of course, it's begging the whole question of whether the senses are reliable for truth, whether they actually tell us about the world around us, whether they tell us that the world is real or not. All of those things have to be assumed. So basically, that's all I'm saying. I'm not arguing for solipsism here in any sense whatsoever. All I'm saying is...
What I'm saying is why don't you, is because you do find evidence, regardless if you can put 100%, proof. You can say that is 100% proof. You still are going to react as if it is proven based on the evidence that you have been provided.
Yep. The best way that I have been able to hear a definition about the whole solipsism issue is that it's just the atheism of reality, the atheism of outside your own mind. So you don't claim to know whether it's true or whether it's false. Just like me as an atheist, I don't claim to know whether God does exist or whether God does not exist. If you're traveling down a fork, or you're traveling down a road and you get to a fork in the road, and one road leads to God 100% does exist, and the other road goes down to what God 100% does not exist, I'm not going down either one. I haven't been convinced down which path is the right one to take. But you calling yourself a theist and arguing for God, you've obviously chosen a path to go down. Now, what we're actually trying to find out is why did you choose that path rather than being skeptical and just said, let me think about this for a sec. Just like when you talk about reality, we're not saying that reality actually exists. We're just saying that reality is putting on a better show than solipsism in itself, just our own mind could ever. I'm sorry, this world is just too entertaining to ignore. But when you talk about God, God isn't putting on a good show. God isn't making himself apparent for our sensory inputs, just like negation said, to actually spark that sort of maybe so. But obviously, being a theist that you call yourself, you obviously went towards that edge. We're wondering why you went towards that edge, if not for evidence, then of what?
If you don't mind, I'd like to take this one, CT.
Sure, go ahead.
I think one of the things, when you're talking about why we went down the road with the evidence, I think what we're doing here is we're confusing empiricism with deductive reasoning. Empiricism is great for learning. We learn a lot from empiricism, and scientific knowledge is, of course, based on empiricism. However, when we prove something in science, we run an experiment 100 times, and if we get the same result 100 times, then it's been empirically proven. But not all learning happens that way, and that's something that I eventually accepted. If we come across a crime scene, we can't look at it all and go, well, I don't know what happened. Let's run the experiment again and just watch empirically to see what happened. We have to deduce the evidence that has been placed in front of us and reach a rational conclusion. That's what happened during the O.J. Simpson trial. The jury deduced the evidence and reached a rational conclusion. Now, many people disagree with that decision. Many people disagree with that decision. And that's what kind of happens when we start deducing the evidence. We come to a rational conclusion and someone say, well, no, I rationally think this instead. Theists, we have looked at the questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Are there morals? And we have said, yes, this is evidence for God, and we're going to deduce this evidence that's been placed here. And it's going to, the most logical conclusion with the evidence we found is that God exists.
I would like to come back to that, with the questions that why is there something rather than nothing, and all these very, very, very good questions in my opinion. When you actually go back into it, these are questions that almost, at the present time at least, cannot be answered. And so rather than, I heard this from a quote from Christopher that said people would rather have a conspiracy theory rather than no theory at all. So before we actually continue, I just want to ask you, are you actually okay with not knowing? Do you have to have an answer for everything when it comes to existence and why the things are the way they are, why the constants are the way they are, and so on?
Well, no, I mean, there's several questions that I could ask myself that I don't need a definite answer for. Like, for instance, I don't know if there's life on other planets yet. Or more specifically, I don't know if there's intelligent life on other planets. That's not really a issue for me. If science decides that down the road, then yes, I could say, okay, yeah, there's life on other planets. That's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, but when it comes to like the beginning of the universe and all these things, basically what I'm going at is that you seem to look at the questions that cannot be answered, which can then be tied to the biblical truths, if we can call it that, and use that as your foundation for the actual beliefs you hold. Would you say that that's a accurate diagram of the circle of life, if you can call it that?
Well, not necessarily. You said questions, and it's kind of like you implied that I look at questions and like, well, there's no answer to these questions, so therefore God did it. And that's not really what theists do. They look at the evidence, and then we say, well, what's the most rational conclusion leading from the evidence? Does
Right.
God exist? Does God not exist? It's not, I can't answer this question, therefore God did it. That's kind of a God of the gaps.
Mm.
And theism isn't really based on God of the gaps. I'm sure some theists do, and they argue for God of the gaps. But really it's the evidence that we have, and then we build from there.
All right, then. I don't want to leave Cartesian out, and neither negation, so if any of you want to continue on, I can mute my mic real quick.
Yeah, sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
This came up in a previous program as well, and I just wanted to jump in on this point about, this is a question about philosophy of science more than maybe anything else, and that is how we look at the evidence. A lot of philosophers of science today have rejected the idea that, the very modernist idea after the Enlightenment, that what scientists do is they dispassionately look at the world around them and describe it in their scientific theories. This is not a popular idea in philosophy of science anymore. The idea that's far more popular is that actually what we do is we admit that we come with a set of assumptions, we come with a worldview, and what we must try and do is allow that worldview and that perspective to be challenged by what we find in the empirical world. But we must not ignore the fact that we all have assumptions. We all come with presuppositions that we make to the evidence, and it's important that we recognize that we have them, but it's a lie to think that we look at evidence, or especially that atheists look at evidence, and therefore they see the evidence so much clearer than a theist sees it. For one, that's an ad hominem attack, which of course would be a logical fallacy, but also it's just not, it's an idea that's completely rejected now in science, especially since Karl Popper and his exposure of this idea of extreme inductivism, that we just come to the evidence with no background knowledge or anything like that. That's just simply not the case. So what we must be willing to do is to reevaluate our presuppositions, our assumptions, our worldviews in the light of the evidence that we come across and the good arguments that we find. So I think that's an important point worth making. So, for example, if a theist finds, for example, I mean, I don't know if this was George Lemaitre's reaction. I doubt it was. But, you know, when he first came up with the idea of the universe having a beginning, which was then labelled as, I doubt that he was saying, oh, well, my evidence now will demonstrate the existence of God. I've certainly never read anything of him reacting in that way. However, even if he did, that wouldn't change the evidence that he found. So his reaction to it would be completely independent of the evidence that he found. So there might be philosophical implications to his findings, and those can be argued out much later on. But the point is that his own assumptions didn't make the evidence more or less likely. So I think that's something that's worth considering here.
I'm going to have to disagree at least slightly there. My understanding, and I'm not going to rehash everything you said because the viewers can rewind it if they need to, the way I was trained, and just so you know, I do have scientific background and, you know, been fairly well educated, I guess. My understanding of that is the reason that we need to be aware of our preconceptions, pre-ideas, is not to somehow use them to validate the evidence, which it seems like you're almost going that way, but the exact opposite. So when we do attempt to publish a paper, when we do attempt to look at the evidence, we understand that it may be clouded because of our preconceptions and back away if before we make judgments and factor in that realization, which it didn't seem like you were getting to. It was more that we have these preconceptions almost to the point where it felt like you almost have to accept that regardless what those preconceptions are, they are a valid concern, if you will. And what I mean by a concern there is that it's something that brings us more insight into the evidence, not potentially skews the evidence. And my training has been to that you need to be aware of those preconceptions because you do have a propensity at that point to color the evidence because of preconception.
Yeah, well, I'd just like to clarify, I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying that validates the preconceptions. I never actually said that. All I'm saying is that there is no objective outside of my preconceptions perspective to come from. We all have our preconceived notions, and if we fail to admit that we have them, that's when they can actually become very, very dangerous. So actually, I'm not saying that validates them in any way whatsoever. So, but it might, rightly or wrongly, and that can be left completely open, it might rightly or wrongly inspire a scientist or a philosopher in order to do research in an area where they actually have some preconceived idea. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, Lawrence Krauss was inspired, his whole drive, his inspiration for wanting to discredit the idea that a universe cannot come from nothing. Let's say his underlying reason, his interest in wanting to do that, was his profoundly strong atheism. That, even though it would be interesting and even though it inspires him, that would not discredit his scientific evidence. So I just want to be clear about that. So sometimes people talk that way as if having preconceptions or, you're a theist so you see it that way. That's none of us live in a world where we are objective to evidence. And it's important that we admit that up front. So
and building on that, the atheist philosopher David Hume said many years ago that reason is and ought to be a slave of the passions. And his basic point was that humans are not really just logical creatures. If that was the case, we would agree on everything because we would just go where what is logical. We tend to force a reason to fit our passions. Everything goes back to our desires in a sense. And I think that's what CT is trying to hit on.
All right, and we're back, and we are joined by the infamous DarkMatter2525. Are you with us? DarkMatter? Hello, can anybody hear me?
Hello?
Oh, okay. I guess
okay, sorry about that. I had to mute Blog TV or it was going to interfere.
Yeah. All right, well, it's really good to have you. Big fans. It was a real treat to have you on. I know you've watched that clip, and I actually haven't seen the rest of the video. I know you haven't either, so I want to hopefully segue straight from that, and I want to ask you your own response to the topic question. So the first thing I would like to ask is whether or not, have you ever been a theist?
No, I haven't. I've never believed in God. My earliest memories about the topic of theology was when I was in second grade, and I got into an argument with a kid, and I told him that he was talking about God, and I told him that God doesn't exist. It's just a fairy tale, and he told me I'm going to burn in hell, and that was about the extent of the conversation. But that's my earliest memory, and that was second grade. So I think it's safe to say I was never a theist.
Yeah, so you weren't raised in a religious home or ever really pressured to,
No. My mom is a theist. My dad, he was always waxing and waning. He was very undecided, quintessential agnostic. And religion wasn't really a big part of our household. I mean, we experienced religion outside of the house. We went to Sunday school and church sometimes with our aunt. But that was the extent of it. It was never a big deal. No.
Huh. Yeah, I have to say, I'm really actually genuinely surprised every time I hear that. I mean, it's hard for me to really imagine people not be. I mean, maybe that's my own bias, but so okay. So because I guess you've never really been a Christian, I guess I would want to ask the follow-up. Since you were never really a believer, what caused you to take an interest in this issue then? What's kind of been your motive to engage in this topic?
Well, besides one of the things that motivated me was all the assumptions that people make about people like me who don't believe in a God. You know, that we're immoral. You know, we don't have a good basis for our beliefs, and or why we disbelieve, or that we actually do believe, and that we try not to, or say we don't because we don't want to be accountable, or whatever. There's 1,000,001 assumptions I've heard, and that's part of it. I want to be able to combat that.
To like dispel the stereotypes, I guess, and I think we've all heard the statistics. We're one of the most distrusted groups in America. Right. So yeah, right. I hear you on that.
But another big part of it is that I just believe that theism is false, and I have this pet peeve of. Oh, I'm sorry about my kid making noise. Can you hold on 1 second? Thanks. Okay, never mind. My wife got him. But perhaps it's even a irrational pet peeve. But when people believe in something that's false, I just have this passion to want to show them, no, that's not right. You shouldn't believe that. That's false. Don't believe in it. It just drives me crazy. So when that's a
yeah. So like a kind of educational or like general, helping people define what you view as the truth, I guess you could say. I mean, put it simply. Yeah. So I wanted to hopefully. I know you and Cartesian have somewhat of a history, and I don't, we don't want to bring any of that up. But I wanted to ask: is there, from listening to the clip, is there anything that? Because I would say I think I actually agree for the most part with nearly everything Cartesian and IP said. Is there anything that jumps out at you that really jumps out at you as really just blatantly false, or you take issue with?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what he said, but I do take issue with some of what he said as well. Yeah, I was only able to watch the first half hour, so I can only address that much of it. But one thing he does is, well, let's take it from the beginning. He starts out with his definition of faith. Faith defined as trust. And I agree, many theists do define it that way. But it's interesting that he doesn't acknowledge the great many who don't. Many theists don't use it that way. The way Mark Twain and Dawkins, I believe he gave as examples, says, they'll even use the word trust to mean it in a different way than trust, like trust that God exists, even though you don't feel his presence. This is kind of like the way he doesn't like to describe faith. We'll see, ex-theists, people who are atheists, quote unquote, using the word faith wrongly when they were ex-theists, and he doesn't seem to acknowledge that.
Yeah, what I would say is that, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was the first point I was going to try to. I have several points we could go through, some of the main points the video makes, and maybe we could throw this open. The first is, it seems like to a degree you do acknowledge that there is a distinction to be made between faith in the sense that Cartesian is speaking about and the sense that, say, people like Dawkins refer to, or the Mark Twain version of faith, just blind faith.
Right.
So what I hear so far is that you guys, you're at least on the same page there. I guess what I hear you saying is that he misunderestimates that a lot of people have faith in the latter sense, the blind faith, as opposed.
Right.
He seems to suggest that the majority of believers, it's the trust type of faith.
Right. He defines Christian ideals of faith based on certain philosophers, which speaks little to the average believer. Now, it's very intelligent of him to take on the position of the philosophers who have given a lot of deep thought to this, but he's claiming that that's the position of what? All the Christians? No, not even most of them, I'd say. It's like he completely ignores the existence of creationists.
So yeah, okay, so perhaps that's the real disagreement here is to what extent is the average person, what type of faith would the average...
Can I quickly jump in here and state
Please,
that,
go for it.
To be fair, Cartesian was basically, describing things from his own perspective, and you can't expect him to speak for all of Christianity. So, although I agree with what you're saying, I feel it's somewhat missing the point of, the clip was them defending or at least describing how they came to believe and why they believe.
He's responding to atheists who misuse faith as far as he's concerned, but maybe the atheists aren't talking to him. Maybe they're talking to creationists. That's my point. If I use faith in that way, it's because I've heard a religious person use it that way, and I'm responding to them, not to Cartesian theists. So he would be wrong to say that I'm wrong about him when I'm not even talking about him.
Well, yeah, so it depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about Cartesian, I have no problem taking on his sense of faith, because that's the sense he means it. I can't deny him that.
Yeah.
But in terms of, someone else, it's just relative to who we're talking about. And I think it's important to ask the person, whoever it is that you're referencing, what is the type of faith? That's the question to be asked, it seems to me. And what is your sense of faith? What do you mean by that?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Was there anything? I had another point. Froggy, anything else you want to add, or?
Yeah, sure, I could. My main issue with what I had with Cartesian, from the small bit I saw, I haven't seen the whole clip, so I can't say definitively, and it is a bit unfair, but we haven't got enough time in the show to play the whole thing. But he seemed to avoid the question of, if he didn't have evidence because he was trying to avoid evidentialism, then what is the source of his rationality? Because, and I think IP seemed to make this claim of rationality as well, but I don't really see them delving into the topic of the nature of that rationality and how that rationality leads them to Christianity.
Well, yeah. That was the second point. That's a good segue, because that was the second other main point I was going to try to ask and throw it open. So the issue he brought up was, is it, do all your beliefs have to be based in evidence? And I guess that's the idea of evidentialism. That's not to say, though, I don't think, that he's claiming his belief in God is necessarily one of those beliefs. In other words, I think he's making a distinction between, perhaps justified belief that doesn't have evidence, in the case of, solipsism. So let me throw it out. I'll ask the question. What do you guys think? Do you think in order for it to be considered rational, do beliefs have to be based in evidence? Or is there any good reason to have a belief besides evidence?
He doesn't want to get tied down to evidentialism, which it's good for him. That's smart, because the history of theological claims have had a horrific track record when the realm of science reaches the ability to verify those claims. So now the theists are wising up and claiming that God is beyond empiricism, so we can never know for sure, and it's awfully convenient if you want to make whatever claims you want, a position that doesn't require the nasty pressure of being verified or reasonably justified. Where do I sign up? But we have beliefs for which we do not have evidence. That's true, and we can often justify those beliefs. But those beliefs are rarely what we our whole lives revolve around, like a religion. Redline asked him, when you remove the evidence, what foundation does he have left to justify his belief? Well, I think that was a really good question, and Cartesian kind of dodged it. His answer was basically that he assumes it or presupposes it, but I think that that's exactly what he was trying to get away from when he said faith, in the way in which he doesn't like to define it. And it's a circular foundation. Let's use trust to illustrate the point. His foundation for what he believes in is that he trusts what he believes in. Well, that's no foundation at all. That's like saying I believe it because I believe it.
Well, let me jump in real quick, because I think the relevant issue in which that was brought up, though, was the issue of solipsism. Not so. I would just caution, not, because I think at one point he actually did say he does have evidence. Him and IP both said that they believe they do have evidence for their belief in God. But when it comes to the issue of, say, an external world, that's something which, and everyone in the conversation seemed to be on the same page in regards to this, that is something we do believe in, or rather, we believe in the external world, but there can never really be any evidence for that. But I think he did say, that's, so I just want to make that distinction, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, were you about to?
No, it's not important. No.
Can I jump in quickly and state that I
please.
thought the whole solipsism conversation took a bit of a strange turn, because I felt like negation of P and Redline weren't necessarily talking about solipsism accurately per se. I don't know your thoughts on it, Whit, because you're much more into solipsism than I am.
Oh, well, the point of bringing up the solipsism was just it's just an example of something that most people, anyways, have a belief about, that there really is no evidence to justify. I mean, the very nature of any such evidence would be to beg the question of what it, and as far as I can tell, would you agree with that, Dark Matter? That, the idea of like an external world, that would be a belief, at least, that theist and atheist alike, we can at least be on the same page in regards to that being something there's no evidence for, but we still believe in it. Just as that side point.
Yeah, it would mean that reality isn't what it appears to be. I don't think that helps theism in the slightest bit. In fact, if anything, it hurts it.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. And I don't think they were trying to say, therefore God or anything. But just as the point of him saying, I don't want to be tied to evidence, because then, I'd have to be basically a solipsist, in other words. If all my beliefs have to be based in evidence, I would have to become a solipsist. So maybe let's see if I had another point. So they also brought up the idea of like preconceptions and assumptions playing a role in how we discern the evidence for a claim or position. And, basically they said none of us can be really objective because our biases are like a filter. So to what extent do you guys think that our assumptions play a role in discerning evidence? Are we inescapably biased when it comes to assessing evidence?
It takes a lot of integrity. I think that deep down, if you base your beliefs on what you want to be true, then you're just being dishonest with yourself.
Okay. Froggy, anything to add?
I can't really think of anything so far.
Was that when he was talking about how most philosophers of science reject that evidential way of looking at the world? Oh yes, and we come with a certain set of assumptions.
Yeah.
Well, we need philosophy to help develop hypotheses and empiricism to develop theories, and they both have their place in the world, and neither one should be eschewed for the other. And he says that we come with a worldview that we must allow it to be challenged by empirical findings, and I agree with that. I do agree with that.
Yeah, I found that kind of strange because I don't know, it makes me wonder to what degree people do actually challenge their own beliefs, because I guess I find myself somewhat surprised when you can ask them a question and it seems like, for example, when he seemed to me anyway to be actively avoiding this question of evidentialism, saying that it doesn't apply to him. Well, why doesn't the question apply to you? You know, give a reason why. It just seems like by just merely asserting it, that is just a cop-out.
Yeah, and maybe that's not truly really a relevant point, perhaps, because I mean, you would have to then, I mean, in relation to the question of your belief in God, which they said they do have evidence for, which seems to suggest that it is at least something that is decided on the basis of evidence. That, you know, perhaps if there weren't the evidence there, they might not believe in it. So, in other words, it's not an unshakable belief. It's not.
Oh, I didn't say that at all. But it just seemed that was the perfect opportunity to go into that kind of evidence, because it is. Why do you believe? And I don't feel like I understand any better than I did before I watched the video why they believe.
Well, I think we could come away with at least the points that they're saying that they do believe based on evidence. At least they seem to suggest that it's not purely emotional for them. And I think at one point Cartesian at least hinted at the idea that even if it were emotional, that would somehow delegitimize it. Is not actually, and I would actually tend to agree with that. I think there are, I mean, I would tend to agree with, and I think they kind of made this point at the end, you know, we are driven by emotions inherently, and we do, I mean, I would even argue, I don't have to here, but you know, that emotions are kind of the basis for all of our motivations to do anything, and so, yeah. There's nothing. If anyone wants to add on to that, I was going to bring negation in.
Well, I would say. Go ahead.
So let me put it to you this way: do you think, even if it was an emotional drive, that does that illegitimize that as a good reason to believe, if it makes you happy and comfort or whatnot, right? I mean,
emotion absolutely does not make your belief untrue. I mean, it has nothing to do with that. What it can do, though, is make it suspect. It can make you think, oh, are you just believing this because you want it to be true, and are you deluding yourself? That's what it does. But absolutely, you can be emotional about a truth, sure.
Yeah, how about we invite negation at this point, because he was... Oh, go ahead.
Well, he knows what happened later on in the conversation, so he can enlighten us a bit more.
Yeah, hey everybody.
Hey, what's up?
Hello. Hey, Dark. And Wit and Froggy, thank you for having me, guys. Yeah, it was nice and civil and interesting. It's kind of funny that the first 30 minutes was probably the least entertaining, and that's what we ended up getting here, because almost immediately after that y'all cut it off, we actually did start holding their feet to the fire about, because they had repeatedly said this is based in evidence, this is a reasoned decision, this isn't faith in the way that you want to describe it over and over and over. So we started trying to get into that as far as now let's start talking about the evidence. Could you give us some? And the next 40 minutes is song and dance, running through teleological, cosmological, ontological, throwing out quotes from scientists and all of this stuff, but nothing of substance, which was let's say, frustrating, but it was entertaining at the same time. I guess one of the most entertaining parts was, and again, it's a little frustrating because y'all cut it off right there when we were just starting. But IP actually Redline asked them in that way after we got through with that little solipsist argument, or if you want to call it that even. And just to clarify, guys, I understand that I was not shading solipsism in the way that it truly is. That's because I don't believe that. I don't believe anybody. I shouldn't say anybody. I don't believe anybody on the panel that day believed that. And what I was saying is that we act as though things are real. And since we make everyday decisions because we trust our outside sensory inputs, why do you not apply that same standard, if you will, to your belief in God? And that's where I was going with that.
Yeah,
that's why I was trying to. Yeah, that's why I was trying to lay the foundation that no, I don't. You're not a solipsist, and no, you can't tell me that you filter everything through this all honest.
I got to stop you there, because you both, as far as I can tell, the way you both tried to step beyond the bounds of solipsism was pure assumption.
Absolutely, and
right?
I even addressed that. I said that even though I'm making assumptions based off of sensory input, if you'll remember, I also clarified that by saying I absolutely agree that it could be completely flawed and I could be wrong about all of it, but I don't base my actions through that filter. I don't filter my sensory input through the solipsist eyes.
No, exactly. So your filter is a belief beyond solipsism that there is an external world, blah blah blah, but the point is, I think we've already admitted there can be no evidence for that. That's something that is really assumed just on blind faith, if you will. And I guess I would try to turn the question back on you that, given that so many people believe that with purely blind faith, or and as you say, act accordingly to that belief, what's the difference between that and just, because it's commonly phrased solipsism as the problem of other minds, and you could say that God is merely just another mind. What's the reason to suppose that I have a mind? But because in the same sense, I'm just as immaterial, or just as supernatural in that sense of a mind.
Absolutely. And you could draw a direct correlation. If I was hearing voices from God in the way that I am hearing voices from you right now, you're no more than a disembodied voice as far as I'm concerned. I've never met you. I know very little, if anything, about you. So we could draw that correlation that you're a disembodied voice, just in the same way if God was speaking to me, it would be a disembodied voice. But the reason I believe in you is because I do get a sensory input, because it is, at least from what I can tell, beyond my control. You do affect my reality, the way that I perceive it. Now, could it be completely a construct in a computer? Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that the reason I don't believe in the God is because God does not interact with me, whereas you do. That was the distinction that I think we actually ended up getting to later on in the conversation. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I hear you. Does anybody have anything to add to that, or?
I guess I'd say that solipsism, it doesn't really try to solve a problem the way the way God, is used to, as a necessary being, and I don't believe that such a being is necessary. And if solipsism is true, it wouldn't really make a difference. We'd still act I'd still act the way I do now. I'd still interact with people the way I do. I'd still, work and do what I do. How would I change my life? I don't think I would.
I think that's an interesting point, because essentially what you're arguing is that solipsism or not, the difference is inconsequential apart from the epistemological subtleties of language and how you directly appeal to knowledge and what have you, whereas beliefs in gods, at 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 the minimum, say a deistic god, is equally inconsequential, which is why most atheists, I think, don't have a problem with deism. But it does seem that theism does have these consequences relating to the characteristics that they apply to God. And this is the thing that I find curious, that they don't get into actual rational argument for when they start defining him as all-powerful and all-good. And, you know, you get these theological and cosmological arguments, but that doesn't lead to the Christian God.
Absolutely not, and that was the point that I made when he brought that up. In fact, I kind of, when he got through lining out his argument, he kind of conflated teleological and cosmological together. So what ended up happening is he was arguing that since we've got a fine-tuned universe and we know it had a beginning, it had to be a supernatural being, and listed all the attributes. So what I said is okay, I'll give you every premise. You're absolutely right. For the sake of argument, everything you said there is 100% correct. But I want to know, if your son came to you and said, Dad, what I hear is it's not a God that did all this, but a super intelligent race of beings. Their third grade science project is to make universes. And that third grade class made our universe and fine-tuned it for the way it is now. To which he wanted to, go back and say, well, you're third grader because your third grader is made of matter. No, I didn't say that. Because your third grader is of this universe. No, I didn't say that. Your third grader's not outside of time. No, I didn't say that. And then it gets to the point where I'm basically making my third grader have all of the same attributes of God, except he's not all powerful, not omnipresent, all of that. And then he says, well, who made your third grader? And I said, who made your God? To which, well, you can't ask that. So not only are you putting constraints on my third grader, you are special pleading for your third grader. If your God, you want to give these extra attributes and then say that your God doesn't have to be constructed, but mine does, you're going to have to tell me why that is. And again, that's the type of arguments we went back and forth with little to no explanation. In fact, I think we ended to the point where, they never could come back. They would keep saying that their explanation is better and it's the more reasonable explanation, but could never give a reason why their explanation was better than my third grade explanation. In fact, at one point, I think it was CT said, well, if you look at Occam's razor, God is much more probable than your third grader. To which, and I dropped the ball here, what the rant I should have gone on there was, you're telling me that a 14 billion plus year old universe with hundreds of millions of galaxies and hundreds of millions of stars in each one of those galaxies, there happens to be an insignificant star, an insignificant galaxy, and there happens to be a average planet made of average stuff that God constructed to put his favorite and only beings on. All of this extra stuff is just for us. That's a more compelling and reasonable argument than we're just the byproducts of a third grade science experiment. I don't understand that. It makes, to me, it makes Occam's razor would follow from the third grader, not from the super powerful being doing all this extra stuff just for us. But again, like I said, I went there, but not in that detail. So anyway, I don't want to hog the show, guys. I feel like I'm rambling.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about where to go from there. I mean, so they gave the standard arguments for for theism. I mean, the way I guess I see it overall is at that point is it just a mere disagreement about the soundness of these arguments? I mean, so is it just as legitimate as our position in terms of at least being, grounded in evidence, and it's just the only real disagreement is the disagreement on the certain premises. In other words, I want to say it like this: that it seems to me, and this is not, doesn't go for all theists, obviously, but at least there are some theists to whom you could say their reasons for belief are perfectly legitimate, perfectly rational. It's just that the only disagreement between them and, say, an atheist is that we disagree on certain facts about the world. But given that they accept certain facts, it leads to their conclusion, and given that we accept certain facts, it leads to our conclusion. Or is that?
We actually wound up kind of at that point. Right before I had to leave, IP posed the question that we had got into the conversation of, if we would have stayed basically God of the gaps, because that's what it ended up being, and of course they wouldn't agree to that, but I think we demonstrated many times over that it actually is God of the gaps. That we are basically doing the same thing, except we're filling our gaps with the faith in humanity being able to answer these questions later on through science, either scientific methodologies and or being able to be more intelligent and see what see reality for what it is.
And so the I guess the slight edge that you try to give the atheist or scientific side in that sense, because from the outset it seems like they're both, you're placing faith in both. The only reason to give the slight edge to science, I guess, is, as you said, the track record.
Exactly, and that's where I went. Because he said, "Isn't it just faith?" And I said, "I don't know if I would call it faith. I think that if you look at what happens throughout time, throughout going back basically as far as you want to. I use the example of if you're standing on a hilltop and you notice a little cloud coming out of nowhere, it builds, and then all of a sudden a superheated bolt of plasma comes and hits a tree next to you, and that tree instantly bursts into flames, and you had no idea where that superheated plasma came from. You would be very tempted, I could see, to say that that's the hand of God. And for some reason, God didn't like that tree, or potentially the person next to you, especially if you knew the person next to you did sin, before, well, God just struck him down. Well, now we know it's not God that's creating lightning bolts. We know what generates that. And in the same way, I have faith that in what this specifically was talking about is, can we get to a better understanding of how our universe came into being, and
faith for the gaps that we currently have. Faith
exactly.
Faith that science will eventually answer those gaps, right, as opposed to theology.
Well, the way I ended was, or the way that I think I wrapped it up was, every time there's been a gap in science, or been a gap, science has filled the gap. And not only filled it in a way that makes rational sense, but a utilitarian way as well. Whereas any time that theism has had a gap, it has failed utterly. And the only reason that there's still gods of the gaps is because, in my opinion, science hasn't progressed enough to be able to fill those gaps.
Yeah, but then I guess the obvious example where science doesn't apply is perhaps God, or God, morality. Did they haul out the moral argument at any point?
No, actually, we weren't.
I think I heard them mention that in the beginning, and I want to throw this open, Dark Matter. Do you have anything to the question of, is it simply a matter of us disagreeing on the premises? I mean, it seems like either we have to deny that they're being illogical, that the arguments and their beliefs are actually illogical, that it doesn't follow given their premises, or are we just saying your premises are false? Is it just a mere disagreement on certain facts about the world?
Well, it depends on the argument. There's some arguments where I would disagree with, them referring to certain things as facts, period. And, there's other arguments where, when we just come to different conclusions. But, it depends on the argument.
Yeah, so in I don't know, I guess the way I see it, though, if we just merely disagree on the premises, then it's just a matter of I agree with this premise, you agree with that other one. But insofar as we agree with those separate premises, we're both being, would you say we're both being at least rational according to the premises we accept, or no?
See, I think what it boils down to is, and we really didn't get a chance to hit on this, and I really wanted to get there, but of course we ran out of time, is that I really wanted to examine it from a logical standpoint and say, okay, we do understand there is a difference between a logically valid argument and a logically sound argument. And I see theism is just that. They have logically valid arguments, but the soundness of those arguments, when tested, seems to fall apart almost every time.
So that's what I'm hinted at. Insofar as I mean by rationality, I'm speaking logically, as in logically valid. Right. Their conclusions, in other words, do follow naturally from their premises. But
they follow the same way as you can use, all pink elephants, therefore you're a pink elephant.
Well, exactly. But the problem with something like that isn't the logic of it. It's the soundness. Whether or not that premise one is inside. And so I mean, this is what I'm trying to throw out there. The way I see it is that we just disagree on the premises. And so I wouldn't, what I don't like is when I hear a lot of, and this isn't to say all theists are completely rational. I mean, in some sense, I would say everyone is rational to a degree, but what I don't like to hear is people just say theists are irrational and we're irrational.
Absolutely.
I think the issue is really that we accept certain facts and they accept certain facts, and our facts contradict. We're at a disagreement on the facts, not the logic, not the rationality, so to speak.
I would agree with that for the most part, but I think it goes a little bit deeper in that the curiosity, I guess, is the best way to phrase it there. If I get a fact, especially if it's something that seems, let's say, sketchy to me, I think my curiosity is going to take over, and I'm going to go investigate that fact, if you will, and try to discern for myself as much as possible how much it reflects reality. And I think that's where the premises get skewed, because when you walk into a church and are told this is truth, if you question it, it's blasphemy and da-da-da-da, well, that takes at least that step completely out of the equation. And if you don't have the step where you can validate the facts that your premises are based off of, I don't know if I would even call that rational anymore. I mean, tell me how you feel about that.
Does anybody go ahead?
Yeah, it's inspiring philosophy. In that clip, he made a crime scene analogy regarding coming to knowledge without empiricism, and I thought it beautifully illustrated the reliability of empiricism versus, old-fashioned sleuthing. DNA evidence, fingerprint analysis, security cameras, all these things came about through scientific investigation. Now, a modern-day crime scene is inextricably linked with science, and our ability to catch the perpetrator is greatly increased because of empiricism. Now, think about it. Are you more likely to get away with rape and murder today versus 100 years ago? Well, no. Basing your beliefs beyond the realm of empiricism speaks to the weakness and unreliability of your belief. That's not to say that everything you believe requires an empirical basis, but those beliefs you hold which do not have an empirical basis should be held tentatively, and certainly not with religious fervor. So when you talk about, having these facts and coming to these different conclusions, I think that when you have empiricism, and when we're basing, it depends a lot on what we are basing our beliefs on, and empiricism has a much better track record than religious, just faith. And I know they're not going to like me using the word faith in that way, but basically, we're making claims about the universe, that God created the universe. Now, this is insane to me because we can't even define the universe. We don't know what all the universe entails yet. Our universe is everything that exists. We can't even come close. We don't know everything that exists. We find new particles. We don't know if there's a multiverse. We don't know if there's other realms of space and time, other big bangs. And in our very, very relatively young, limited knowledge, we're drawing these grand sweeping conclusions that we know everything that exists had to be created. That's crazy to me. Why not just reserve your judgment and take the information and facts and evidence as it comes, and accept what we know to be true, and hold your beliefs tentatively and without religious fervor. That's what I'm trying to get out there.
Good point. Good point. Froggy, do you have anything to add to this?
I was just typing in the chat that I don't believe that Kalam is even valid. So when you say that, theists have these valid arguments, I find most of their evidentialist approaches aren't even valid logically speaking, let alone sound. For example, in the video you made, actually, when you were rebuting the Kalam cosmological argument, you made the point that William Lane Craig essentially ambiguates what he means by something to be caused, whether it be a transformation of matter or whether it be ex nihilo creation. And so I think, they take advantage of these very, very subtle manipulations in logic to create their conclusion. Not all the time, but in their evidentialist approaches.
And I would want to try to make a distinction between the arguments that are offered as a public support, as a way of publicly trying to defend those beliefs, and what I see is the real, I don't want to say arguments, but the real reasons why people believe. That's not to say their emotions are irrational, but I think that the reasons people give for their beliefs are generally not the actual reasons that they came to those beliefs to begin with. Those are just kind of arguments they give to try to defend them publicly. And on that account, I guess you could say they're invalid. But I guess what I would say is that there are some premises within themselves that they inherently hold as true. And I guess those are the premises. When I say their belief is still rational, I'm saying that given that they believe in those premises as true, these inherent premises, apart from whatever argument they give, based on those premises, the conclusion does follow. And
can you give me an example of one that isn't God exists, that actually makes any sense?
Well, I guess you could say, the moral, perhaps you could go the moral route and say, when they have this feeling of like something being absolutely wrong, like it makes no sense in their mind how that could be the case except for, a God, I guess. And so the premise, I guess, would be that, this objective absolute moral exists. I mean, and then you would just, I guess, it would somewhat follow the moral argument. But, yeah, we could maybe get into that. What you guys feel on the topic of objective morality?
We almost opened that can of worms right when I was leaving. I didn't have enough time, so yeah. I mean, if you want to, that's fine with me. I have no problems with it.
I think we might have a caller lined up. We could probably, unless somebody else has something to add at this point, we could maybe bring in a caller.
Bring in
Does
the caller
anybody-
and see what they've got to say and what we've already said, unless we've got something to add on the current topic.
You're going to let him on the show? Are you kidding me, really?
Hello.
I was hesitant about it.
How you doing, Josh? I'm fine. Always be hesitant. As long as participants here, I think that that dialogue really will remain in a civil manner. We'll be able to discourse with.
No yelling tonight, all right?
Yeah, I sorry, and let me explain just before. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting. But I live by the precept that these religious doctrines and beliefs do not deserve an iota of respect, which is one of the reasons why I don't entertain effort to explain somebody's belief or why they believe, especially if it doesn't get into the finer points of evidence. So
let me put it to you this way. I could even go so far as to, for the sake of this conversation, to grant you that okay, maybe their beliefs actually don't deserve any respect whatsoever. But wouldn't you at least, as a human being, say humans deserve a level of respect? I mean, regardless of whether or not you believe, it doesn't commit you to having to say your beliefs are incredibly credible or accurate. But at least we can talk in a way that I treat you as a person with innate dignity and respect.
no, absolutely, that is imperative. And I don't willy-nilly when somebody identifies as a theist, I don't come down on them and immediately insult them and malign their chosen profession or whatever it is. In my daily life, I have great respect for all human beings. But if those human beings use their doctrine to, in my opinion, teach and show and I guess you could say indoctrinate children with these messages and inhibit their lives with the doctrine, that's when I get nasty. And the people that I get nasty with are those who I believe dangerously put their proselytization or whatever their particular brand of bullshit vending that they enjoy.
And I hear that and I get you there as well. I guess I would just say, hold on, maybe I should throw this open to someone else. Hold on one sec. Okay, sorry, I'm good. The only thing I would say about that, though, is that I would still be hesitant, even though I can completely sympathize with the idea that, nobody wants children to be indoctrinated, and nobody's going, I'm not saying, give them enough respect, to let them indoctrinate children. But if your goal is to actually prevent them from indoctrinating children, I guess I would just question what's the best method to do that. Is approaching them hostile really the best way to stop them? And I would say no. I would say the best way really is to come at them, from a non-hostile point of view, where maybe you can actually get through to them.
It's not effective. And getting through to them isn't the aim. The aim is to be the example, because that's what is understood. It's more understood to be the example of somebody. You identify people in society who you believe and others believe. There's some. I don't base it on consensus. I just base it on just gut feeling. People with personal ministries that minister to youth. People that do faith healing, like the guy yesterday. With those types of people, I don't think that there's any common ground to be had, other than I won't harm you physically or financially, as part of my own personal ethic. But I will malign you and mock you in center square. And I believe it's an essential part to bringing about awareness and being an example, to outline the absurdity.
Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, it seems to me that if you want to influence other people's views, then you need some form of respect. Because if someone doesn't respect you, then you haven't got a chance in hell of convincing them of anything. And so I suppose the question for me is, what defines someone with a respectable character? How do you put respect in other people for you? And, I live my life trying, I like to think, and I probably fail miserably, but I like to think that I act in a relatively respectful manner and people give me that respect. That's not to say that I win every argument because of it, but I think it helps a lot that if someone respects me, they're much more likely to take what I've got to say seriously. So when I approach, say, a theist, and I don't necessarily know who they are, so I can't say I know what type of theist they are, but I like to, talk to them as if, I'm on the same level as them. I'm trying to get to understand what they're saying, and I will just question their beliefs, but I don't want to ridicule them, because when people feel ridiculed, they put up these defensive barriers and they shut down mentally, and I don't see that helping anything.
Yeah, just to make that point crystal clear, to make the distinction between criticizing people's beliefs, which I'm all for, criticize the hell out of beliefs, but it's a far different thing to just criticize the person.
I think there's an important distinction. I don't criticize belief. I don't criticize a person's belief in anything. I think everybody should be free to believe whatever it is they like to believe. I criticize the practice. And the practice, because it's a practical application of their beliefs, and they haven't incorporated into their life and kept it for them. They've moved it out into the world for whatever social gain, for profit, for monetary gain, whatever the case may be. As soon as somebody puts that into practice by manipulating the minds of youth, that's when your respect disintegrates to zero. Other than that, I don't hold any contempt for anyone's particular religious beliefs until those religious beliefs cross the line from being a personal belief to being a practical application of harm.
Yeah, and this all comes back to what started the whole conversation in the first place, and that is that that your actions speak to your true beliefs. What you believe in, what you truly believe in, is going to determine what you do in your everyday life. So what you believe in is pretty important. It's pretty important to address if it's bunk.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more, Dark Matter.
Well, that's what I try to do, but I'm just saying that I take a non-aggressive stance because I think it's more effective to lure people into your way of thinking rather than be aggressive and alienate them.
Yeah, I will concede that being calm and talking about these matters in a carefully designed way in order not to hurt anybody's feelings. There's definitely an allure to that kind of thinking, and I think it's probably more effective than being an asshole or being generally hostile. But it's just not my bag. I'm good at calling out the destruction, the harm in religion, and my personality kind of dictates how I do that. So, though I have calmed down considerably from my youth, where I was very intemperate, now it's kind of the watered down version of me, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody here is, with myself included, is saying that there is not a place and time for what you do, Josh, and you do it you do it very well. But the one thing that makes me hesitant to go down that road, and don't get me wrong, I've been down that road quite a few times. In fact, the guys on here have seen me do that one night. But the thing that worries me is speaking to the audience, and I was thinking about this a little bit, is that if we do have someone on the fence, and again, like it or not, because we are somewhat in the public eye, they're going to view us maybe not the apex of and when I say that, what I mean is what you would turn into if you become an atheist versus what you will turn into if you become a theist. And I think that the stereotype that people of belief already are labeling us with as being the hate-filled, just mad, angry, just vitriolic, nutbag, is that
I agree with everything but the nutbag.
I'm not talking about you, Josh. I'm talking about how they betray us, baby eater. We're eating babies. But what I'm saying is that the more that someone on the fence, if there's two people talking and one remains calm and one acts in a rational manner, and the other one gets heated and, let's say, even justifiably, like I'm not gonna like. I don't want to change this topic to our show last night, but if it gets into a heated discussion versus being very dry and very matter of fact and very cordial to the other person, I think that speaks to the moderate in that, these atheists are not that bad. They're not what they've been portrayed at, and like it or not, I think we're up against that every time we go. When we're speaking somewhere, they're going to think we are over the top, and that's the only caution that I have there. Again, there's times that we need to do that, so don't get me wrong, and like I said, I love what you do. It's just that's the only caution that I have trying to meter myself, if you want to say that. So.
Well, it's valid. It's certainly valid, especially with our poster boy being the amazing atheist.
Exactly.
And I don't get to that level of extreme and irrationality, and just I really wish that wasn't the poster boy for YouTube atheism. But I understand what you're saying, and I do believe that you have a valid point. I'm just not a soldier in the calm army. I'm a soldier in the rational army, and I get my bullets down across the line with words.
Yeah. I was going to say, it seems to me that the styles attract, are better for different scenarios. For example, public debate, if you go all Christopher Hitchens on someone, it makes for quite the entertaining show. But I find, my style is much more suited to a personal discussion with one or two people, which I do tend to have, and I find it very, very engaging. But when you come into group dynamics, which essentially public debate is as a form of group dynamic, you want to appear somewhat authoritative and get some emotion riled in people, and by being fairly aggressive and yet humorous at the same time, it can be very powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. Sex sells.
Well, we're gonna move on. Josh, thanks for calling in. I think we're gonna add in Live Life now, so see if he has anything to add to this. Hello, Live Life.
Hello.
Hello. What's life?
Damn, man, I can't get away from you, man. What the hell?
Sorry.
So what's on your mind? You have anything in particular?
No, I just want to talk about this topic real quick. I know you guys don't want to. If you guys don't want to go on it, then I won't say anything about it.
No, that's fine. I'm actually really happy we're addressing this because I was there last night and I wasn't happy with. I wasn't happy, but I was disappointed that it went that direction.
This is my viewpoint. I agree to a negation to a certain point, and Josh made a wonderful video just now on it, which is very well done. Sometimes when there's bullshit evident, you have to call it out. Now, is there a way we could do it as a civil discourse? Absolutely. We gave the guy all the opportunities in the world for 20-25 minutes, and it was complete BS what he was saying. Now, apparently this guy has a history, and a very dangerous history, and he could be a harm to society in general. Now, I did a lot of investigating, talked to DPR Jones for a little bit today, and supposedly this guy is a danger. He's a danger to children. He's a danger to society. And this guy needs to be exposed. You have to expose people like that. Now, is there a way you can do it in civil discourse? Absolutely, you can. But last night, if I bring people in, I'm going to give them the room. I'm going to give them the floor a little bit. Is that what our show's about? No, that is not what our show's about. We are very adamant when it comes to civil discourse, and we have to do that, and that's what our show's about. Now, you will have a sort of a negative balance in some people's viewpoint, and there's going to be those types of shows, but that's not what our show's about. But I gave them the room, and after I figured out the evidence, I checked out this guy's website when we were on live last night. I was checking out, and this guy, seriously, is a harm to society. He's mentally screwing with people's lives and their livelihood, and you know what? It has to be called out. Now, I agree with negation. Yeah, you have to have civil discourse, and you got to do it in the correct manner, but there's a line there. There's a line. There's a fine line where, well, really not a fine line, but, you know, when somebody steps over that line, you got to call it out, man. You have to call it out.
And I absolutely agree with you, Live Life. I think that, and to be honest, I had no idea who this guy was. In fact, for probably at least the first half of when he was on, I thought he was a Poe. I was getting those, you know, those messages, and I just thought it was Dark Matter and everybody before. It's just a guy calling in, playing. And if I would have known the harm he so than Josh and DPR was.
Well, and let me jump. And look, and none of this is to say people who are actually causing harm in the world, we should just let them go ahead and do whatever the hell they want. I mean, that's not the point. The point is that, well, okay, so for instance, I'll just have blind faith that what you guys say is true about this guy, because I have no idea. I'll just take your word for it. But in the event that he really is this really harmful guy, okay, yeah, he should be stopped. I don't really see cussing at him and screaming at him stopping him. In fact, I see that actually fueling his fire and making atheists just look crazy. But I mean, if we really want to stop this guy, there's ways to do that. But in terms of the conversation that was actually happening, I don't really. I mean, there's a way to show the flaw in everything that he said without, any resort to. I mean, because that's a separate issue. The actual content of what he was saying, I see at least as a completely separate issue than him being a pedophile or whatever the case may have been. I mean, and it was that issue I think that was pertinent to discuss. I mean, if we are having someone on just to talk about how they're a criminal or something, then that's a totally different issue. But
and
I'm interested in taking down the logic and the content of what he was proposing.
Yeah, and Whit, I absolutely, you know how I am. Well, you see how I am. I mean, that's how I want to argue from the beginning. But I think what Live Life is speaking to, and I think what happened with Josh and DPR, is there becomes a time when the emotions take over, for lack of a better term, and that you're just so fed up with it, and it's just so outrageous and such bullshit that you almost, I don't want to say lose control, but you're flaming, you're mad, you're whatever, and
yeah, I understand that. Yeah, so. and definitely, if everything they claimed about this guy is true, he should be taken down. He should be arrested. I mean, what have you? I mean, that's a totally different issue than, having him on to discuss some theory he has.
Yeah,
Well, that was the issue at the end of the show, because DPR is a credible guy. I mean, I did all my investigating before bringing DPR Jones and Josh and the other people. I made an educated decision to say, wait, let this guy talk. He was about, and no lie, 8 or 10 people contacted me about this guy. Everybody knew who he was that contacted me. They were giving me all his links. I was checking the links out live. I'm like, this guy looks like he's a danger. I mean, DPR is one of the most credible guys in the community. I have to, that's one thing I do like about DPR Jones. When he says something, 99.999% of the time, it's pretty much true when he has something to say about somebody in that aspect. And you know what? I got respect for him, so that's why I brought him in. Josh wanted to come in, so I brought him in. And you know what? I don't disagree with what they did. I think, hey, it's free speech. It's a forum that we have, and you can say whatever they want to a guy. I don't care. Do I agree with it? Well, that's not what the show's about, but do I agree with what they said to the guy? Absolutely. If they want to rip this guy a new asshole, yes. Sometimes we do it in our videos, so it doesn't matter if you do it on a live forum or you do it in videos. We rip religion, okay? You say it. We rip religion. We really do. Now, for us who rip religion and ripping somebody that believes in religion, yeah, you can say there's two sides of a coin there. No, I'm sorry. When a guy acts like that, he has to be called out, man. I'm sorry, especially if he has a dangerous past. And this guy's a danger to society and kids. No, he has to be called out and he has to be ripped.
Given you understand all that context, I don't disagree. But I think the biggest problem is, at least initially, when DPR starts doing all that and, everybody started jumping on this guy, I had no idea about this background story and all this context, and and none of it, until you understand any of that, it just looked like raging mad atheists. To any outside observer, to somebody who doesn't know the whole backstory, I mean, you at least should be conscious of the fact. DPR and others should at least be conscious of the fact that that's how you're going to come off. And so perhaps maybe you should start with that background, that context, instead of just...
You know what?
Their demeanor. That's their demeanor. That's what Meridian does, and he does a great job at what he does. I should say how positive he is, or maybe even negative towards religion. I love that about Meridian Frost. He's very aggressive. He has aggressive stance. I love that about him. Same with DPR Jones. DPR Jones could be the nicest guy you want to talk to, but when you cross the line with DPR Jones, especially if he knows you, yeah, man, he's gonna call it as it is, man, and he's gonna get on you. And you know what? DPR knew this guy. He knows where this guy lives. He knows where he goes to church. He knows everything about this guy. So when it comes to DPR being credible, he's very credible. So
what? I just brought up an idea. Before we publish, if it's not too hard to edit, if you could possibly inject right before that, the reason that DPR is about to go on this rant is because, and at least post the guy's links and say, check him out. You'll understand why DPR got so livid, and Josh as well. And I think that would quell any of the theists, like what Whit was saying about, they're just looking like they're raging atheists, because I was the same way. I was like, where's this coming from? I mean, do these guys have a past? Because, of course, I didn't have any knowledge either. And I could see a theist going, what the hell, where did that come from? So I think that's a very good point, Wed, that we need to make sure that everyone at least has the links to look at why. So, because Live Like I was saying, DPR and Josh both are very rational people. In most cases, will give, very cogent, very good arguments. So when they came on there and blew up like that, I mean, it definitely took me back a little bit. I'm like, wow, what is going on, guys?
It didn't take me back any.
Yeah.
Because I know how they are.
Yeah, but
let me ask DarkMatter.
Matter.
DarkMatter's been pretty quiet, and I want to hear. Do you have any thoughts on this at all? Because you were there. I think you saw what happened.
Yeah, DPR told me about the guy. So at that point, I didn't feel bad about. I was hesitant about coming on with my, goofy God character. But after he told me about that, I didn't feel bad about it at all, and I just would have said that the audience could have known. I should have taken that into account. That it would have been nice for the audience to know about this guy before that happened.
I agree.
And to tell you what, DarkMatter, I'm so glad you came on, because it lifted the show back into a positive mode. It made it fun again. Yeah. And I think that was so valuable there, man. I really appreciate that.
I don't know about a positive mood, but it was more uplifting. It was more putting into it.
Yeah, exactly. It was fun again. It was funny. God was there. I mean, I thought it lightened the mood a whole lot. So
yeah. But yeah, it's just these people have to be, I support everybody I'm seeing. It doesn't matter if they're, I hate to say militant, but if they're aggressive, I agree with the viewpoints, because we have to be aggressive to a certain viewpoint. I mean, we do have to be extreme on some issues. Even when we make videos, there's a lot of people that are very extreme in their videos. You know what? I love it. I think it's good. I love people that are very rational, they're very calm, and they explain it. That's fine. I agree with that. And also for people that are extreme. Because sometimes you got to be extreme on certain issues. You got to get the point across in a very extreme matter. So you could tell people, hey, we're right, you're wrong. We know we're right, we know you're wrong. So yeah, sometimes you're going to get extreme, because you know what? It's very infuriating sometimes when you've got to deal with certain issues, like just out of the blue, say the gay marriage issue with Brian Fisher and all these guys. It infuriates me when I watch these guys' videos, because they're completely wrong. They're completely wrong due to their religious beliefs, and I want them to know they're wrong. I want them to know they're wrong, and they should know they're wrong, and everybody should know they're wrong, because look at the demographics now. We're the fastest growing demographic, and showing, our rational viewpoints and promoting free thinking.
Yeah, and again, just to reiterate, nobody wants this guy harming children, and if that's really the central issue and the reason for all the vitriol, then sure, I'm totally behind it. Nobody wants to be harming children. But I mean, as far as what he was saying, I really heard nothing other than just psychoanalysis. And, so just based on that, yeah, I felt like his argument was more than destroyed, but, yeah. I definitely agree that people like that need to be dealt with accordingly, and nobody's arguing that they shouldn't be. So I'm just saying, in terms of that specific isolated conversation, I hope we could take him down on his claims and show him that. Show him where he went wrong instead of just saying you're a fucking asshole cunt. But, okay, we're going to invite Matt on. Thanks for coming on Live Life. We're going to...
I want to say something real quick. 1 minute. It's not even 30 seconds. You will have shows, even on this show, you'll have something where, you're going to have people yelling at each other. It will happen. If you get to the bar at the time, it's going to happen. They're very few and far between. I'm like, our show, the Skeptic Fence Show, it's not like that. That's not what we promote. We promote a skeptic community, people on the fence of religion. If they want to come in and answer questions, we like targeting the modern Christians, the people that want to think, the people that want to learn. Now, when you have people like this, they don't want to learn. They're not going to have a good argument. The argument's going to be wrong 99% of the time. And yes, we got to call it out when it happens. So thank you very much for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming on. So Matt, I don't know if you've been listening at all, or you just came in?
I just came in about 5 minutes ago.
Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to shift topics, or if you had anything to say on this issue. We are running low on time. We have about 14 minutes left. So if you had anything to add. We were talking about the debacle last night.
I think that it was a good case study, really, of different approaches to the theism debate itself, a wider scope even than faith healing. It has more to do with what is our real goal in engaging in conversation and discussion with theism. We have to decide what are we trying to accomplish. And when we approach that on a case-by-case basis, then it really comes down to, well, if someone knows absolutely nothing about what you're talking about, they're completely unfamiliar with what they're hearing, and they're completely new to what's going on, what are they going to take away from it? And if you think of it in terms of that, it's not like you have to always be positive. You always have to be nice. I think that's completely unrealistic. But if you're more interested in just venting at someone, then that is naturally going to be taken as if you are the attacker, regardless of whether or not you're correct. If you are correct, all you have to do is just back up. Here's the reason this person is wrong. Here's the reason that this person is a pedophile or a charlatan. The reason that James Randi is so famous for exposing Peter Popoff and Uri Geller is because he did. He exposed them. He didn't just vent in public about why they were harming society. He actually showed step by step, this is what they're doing, instead of just raging. And I think that's the way that we have to approach this, because there's a video of Eric Hovind and Saitin Bruggencate approaching James Randi and having sort of a debate with him at one of the rallies in the last few years.
Yeah, it was like an ambush. They ambushed him.
Yeah, they ambushed him, but one thing that Saitin Bruggencate did bring up was that he respected the efforts that James Randi did in debunking Peter Popoff. He respected that. And that is common ground when there is something that's harmful to society, whether you're a theist or an atheist, or however you lean. If you are showing, very carefully, this is what a person is doing that's harmful, then people respond to it. They will say, okay, you know what, you're right. And granted, there's still going to be instances where they won't get it, that what they're doing is harmful because it's tied to their ideology. But instances like somebody that's harming children, someone who's taking advantage of people for their own monetary gain, that's very difficult for anyone to justify. And as long as we focus on proving it to people who are capable of being reasoned with, which is people who have been engaged in the theism, atheism debate for a long time, people who know nothing about it, then that is being productive. That is actually doing something that people want to listen to. And you always have people who just want to watch a car wreck, but that's not the majority.
Yeah, and let me say to your point about how perhaps it is unrealistic. I mean, and I don't think anybody's saying we're all going to be happy-go-lucky in this conversation together, 100% all the time with everybody. I mean, that is completely unrealistic. I would just add, the flip side to that is that it's equally as unrealistic to think that screaming at people and calling them names is going to really do anything. Say, let's not arrest pedophiles. Of course, those people need to be dealt with accordingly. So, yeah.
No, that's all I had that I wanted to say.
We wanted to throw it over to Froggy. You wanted to bring up one last point to maybe close out the show?
People in the chat, DarkMatter, sorry, just a minute. DarkMatter, people in the chat have asked about your background in theological study. I suppose they're curious as to what level of research you go into to make your videos. We don't have ages, so try to keep it fairly short.
My videos aren't always based on what is formally theological, theology, formal theology, and what is accepted I try to go after the popular view of theology. There's a more nuanced arguments to be had in theology, which aren't very well translated into short video, comical, cartoon videos. And I might, try to do something a little more intricate on my other channel, my DarkMatter channel, where I can, talk at length and more about it. But when I'm doing a dark matter cartoon, I'm basing it on arguments people have given me, things people have said, popular arguments that can be taken apart and shown why they're wrong, and I'm not even, addressing what maybe the philosophers have gotten into, the well-educated people have gotten into. I fully admit you don't need to be very advanced in theology to get what I'm saying in my dark matter cartoons. My education, as far as that is concerned, is self-education. I'm getting these arguments from people and pointing out why they're flawed. I could go the route and show them why they're wrong according to their own theology, but I'm not interested in promoting theology. I'm not interested in promoting Christianity, even though a lot of the Christian philosophers could point out other reasons why they're wrong within the realm of the theology. But I like pointing out why they're wrong from the perspective of there not being God at all.
More like a layman's point of view.
Yeah. I am a layman. I'm not advanced in theology, no.
Let me say, I think one of the things... were you going to say something, Froggy?
Yeah, I was just saying I think that answers the question quite nicely.
Yeah, one of the ways I kind of view some of your videos, Dark Matter, is that essentially I see that there's basically two ways to take down another position. The one direction is to just kind of reject and deny people's premises and show why they're flawed. And the other direction is to kind of grant their premises and show why, when taken to their logical conclusion, it leads to something absolutely absurd. For example, your video about if heaven really exists, I think it was called. where you basically show, if people really took the idea of heaven seriously, if, so in other words, you grant that. Say, okay, let's say there was a heaven. That means you shouldn't be sad when your family, when fellow Christians die. You should actually probably be happy, if anything, and that's one of the great things I think I really enjoy about, because you make it funny, and it's like satire almost. I mean, you take the beliefs and show why within that belief it can lead to very absurd ideas,
Right.
Is that at all kind of your thinking when you make videos like that?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that people don't, think things through, their beliefs, and that's one of the things that started this conversation. Is that if you are sincere with your beliefs, then it does show in your actions. Like take a monk or a nun, people who have devoted their lives to their religion. I think it would be safe to say that they genuinely believe, but someone who's just, living their life, like the secular lifestyle, getting up and going to work and getting pissed off because they have to wait in line or whatever everyday thing they're going through, they're not living their life like it's only a fraction of eternity, and they have to worry about the afterlife, and where they're going to spend the vast majority of their existence. They're just not living according to their quote-unquote beliefs. And I like to point out, how things should be if what you believe is true. And that's why I don't believe, is because I see the world exactly as how I would expect to see it if there weren't a personal God. Maybe there could be a deistic God, I don't know, or there could be no God at all. That how we see the world, how we see nature, it's exactly how I would expect to see it.
So let me ask you, what is your proof and evidence that atheism is accurate? Okay, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Sure, we are running last 4 minutes. Does anybody have closing statements? Froggy, would you like to say something?
Yes, I'd like to remind people that the video clip we showed earlier was only a half-an-hour clip from the full discussion, which can be found on the Lion Ghost Show channel, and we will provide a link in the description below for those of you who are watching this on YouTube.
Okay, Matthew, you joined last, so would you like to say anything in closing?
No, I don't think so. I don't have anything that I want to add. I look forward to seeing future shows.
All right, thank you. Negation, anything to close with?
Yeah, just wanted to tell you guys thanks for the opportunity. Dark Matter, it killed me yesterday when CT wouldn't let you on. I thought it would have been really fun. But that said, Redline, you did a great job. I really enjoyed having you kind of as my partner in debate. It was a really good time. And again, guys, thank y'all for letting me on tonight. It was a great time.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone that called in, and Negation, Matthew, especially Dark Matter, of course. Would you like?
Hang on. Yeah, I was going to say,
Go ahead.
does Dark Matter want to do his closing statement?
No, I was going to give him the. Yeah.
No, I don't really have anything to close with. Nothing plans to say. Unless anyone has any more questions.
Yeah, and I hope no one, especially if Cartesian was watching, because we would like to have further shows maybe where we could have him on. I didn't want anybody to construe this as us bashing that conversation or anything. I just wanted to get some other people's thoughts on it, bring people into the dialogue. Hopefully, that's what this show is trying to do. Perhaps build bridges instead of.
And also tell your friends about the show.
Yeah, I mean, had Cartesian been okay with me being on the same show as him, I would have remained completely civil. I'm not going to attack him or anything like that. It would have been just like how it is now. Just if I disagree, then I'll say why.
Exactly. I wish we could get past all that just petty BS. I mean, there's a lot of theists that I don't care for, but I have no problems, just biting my tongue, just like you would, Dark Matter, and say, let's talk about this.
Yeah, and again, I know there's a history there, and I have no illusions about healing all wounds tonight on the show, but at least we can show each other that we can respect each other's views, or respect each other enough to listen to each other's views, and go from there. So, I guess we will close the show. Thank you again, especially Dark Matter, for coming in. Doing us a big favor here. Negation, Matthew, everyone else that called. Again, this video will be posted to YouTube under the Lion Go Show. We are every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And am I forgetting anything, Froggy?
That's it. I'd just like to say thank you, and that's the end of the show.